This will teach her what her place is." The husband laughed when he saw the woman who had slapped his wife, but minutes later, the wife began her revenge. As the sound of keyboards echoed in the silent office, Amelia signed the last document. Her hands trembled slightly, not from nervousness, but from the adrenaline coursing through her veins. After years of humiliation, the moment had finally arrived. The clock on the wall read 3 a.m. In a few hours, Ethan Hayes would wake up to find his perfect world had completely collapsed. Amelia closed the portfolio containing the newly signed papers, and, for the first time in years, she smiled. It was a smile she hadn't shown anyone, a smile that carried the weight of a meticulously planned vengeance. She picked up the phone and dialed a number she knew by heart. But to understand how she had reached this point, we must go back to the beginning of this story. 6 months before that decisive night, the alarm clock went off at 6:30 a.m., as it had every day for 15 years. Amelia rose silently from the bed, careful not to wake Ethan, who was sleeping soundly beside her. Her movements were precise and calculated, the result of years perfecting the art of being invisible in her own home. She walked briskly to the bathroom. Her bare feet hardly touched the cold marble floor that Ethan had chosen when remodeling their Upper East Side townhouse without even consulting her. The light from the bathroom mirror reflected her image. At 40, Amelia retained a serene but worn beauty. Her dark eyes had lost some of their innate sparkle, and her brown hair, which she once wore loose in long waves, was now always pulled back in a flawless bun. Ethan had achieved his goal. He had turned the vibrant, dreaming woman she once was into his own shadow. After showering and putting on one of her discreet pantsuits, Amelia went down to the kitchen to prepare breakfast. The house, decorated with luxury finishes that Ethan boasted about to his guests, had become a golden cage for her. While she made coffee and toasted the bread, she remembered the first years of their marriage, when she still believed Ethan's constant criticisms were his way of helping her become a better person. The sound of footsteps on the stairs pulled her from her thoughts. Ethan was coming down, already dressed in an impeccable suit, checking his phone. At 45, he was still an attractive man, with perfectly styled hair and the smile that had captivated half of New York City's business world. That same smile he now used in private to humiliate her. "Good morning, honey," Amelia said with the smile she had perfected over the years. It was a smile devoid of any genuine emotion, a mere habit of appeasement. Ethan barely looked up from his phone. "You haven't forgotten I have an important meeting at 9. I expect my blue shirt is pressed, and I hope you won't bother me during the day with your trivial matters." Amelia felt the familiar pang in her chest, but her expression didn't change. "Of course, everything is ready, and your breakfast is served." Ethan sat at the table without a word of thanks and began to eat while checking his emails. Amelia stood watching him. There was a familiarity in his posture, in the way his eyes scanned the screen. In recent months, she had noticed changes in his behavior. He was coming home later, smiling more often during his phone calls, and had started paying renewed attention to his appearance. "How's that little project of yours, making clothes?" Ethan asked, feigning indifference. But Amelia instantly recognized the prelude to a humiliation. "It's going well. This week, I finished 3 dresses for clients in the neighborhood." Ethan's laugh made Amelia feel small. "Clients in the neighborhood? Amelia, you're 40. Are you still playing fashion designer? Don't you think it's time to grow up and do something more serious?" Amelia clenched her fists behind her back but kept her voice calm. "It's something I enjoy, and it gives me a little extra income." "Extra income," Ethan said with disdain. "Making $50 for a dress isn't extra income, it's pocket money. But I suppose for someone who's never had any real ambition, it must seem like a lot." Every word was like a slap, but Amelia had learned to take them without showing pain. However, something inside her had begun to change. It was no longer just about enduring the humiliation, but about observing, studying, and understanding exactly who the man she had shared 15 years of her life with was. Ethan finished his breakfast and headed for the door. "I'll be late tonight. I have a business dinner. Don't wait up." Amelia saw him off with a kiss on the cheek, which he received with indifference. When the door closed, she stood motionless for a few seconds, breathing deeply. Then, with deliberate movements, she went to the home office computer and turned it on. Ethan believed she was a simple woman with no technological knowledge, but he gravely underestimated his wife. Over the following days, Amelia maintained her usual routine, but with one difference. Now, every conversation, every gesture, every detail of Ethan's life was carefully observed and recorded in her mind. She began to keep a journal, not of emotions, but of concrete facts. Times, phone calls, changes in behavior, names he mentioned carelessly. It was during one of those afternoons of silent observation that Brooke entered her life. Ethan had come home with several colleagues for a work meeting, and she was among them. Brooke was a 32-year-old architect with a modern, aggressive beauty that contrasted sharply with Amelia's quiet elegance. During the meeting, Amelia played her role as the perfect wife, serving coffee and snacks to the guests, but she immediately noticed the way Brooke looked at Ethan, and more importantly, the way he looked back at her. There was an obvious chemistry between them, a complicity that went beyond a simple professional relationship. "Thank you, Mrs. Hayes," Brooke said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes as Amelia served her coffee. "Ethan is so lucky to have such a devoted wife." The word devoted was uttered with a barely concealed disdain. Amelia smiled politely and continued serving the others, but she got the message perfectly. Brooke not only knew her place in Ethan's life, but felt superior to her. That night, after the guests had left, Amelia pretended to be asleep when Ethan got into bed. She heard him checking his phone and saw the light from the screen illuminate his face. He was smiling in a way he hadn't smiled at her in years. When he finally fell asleep, Amelia got up silently and went to her workshop in the basement. There, surrounded by fabrics and patterns, Amelia allowed herself to feel the rage she had suppressed for years. But it was not a destructive rage. It was a cold, calculating anger. She picked up her phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. "Jessica, it's Amelia. I know it's late, but we need to talk about something important. Could we meet tomorrow?" Jessica had been her roommate at Columbia, and now she was one of the most respected lawyers in New York. They had lost touch during Amelia's marriage, but now it was time to rekindle that friendship. The following days were a mix of seemingly normal routines and secret preparations. During the day, Amelia maintained her role as a submissive wife, but at night, she researched, planned, and prepared. She discovered that Ethan had started leaving important documents carelessly on his desk, allowing her to review them while he slept. That was how she discovered something that completely changed her perspective on her marriage. Some of Ethan's most successful projects had been developed on land that was technically their joint property, but he had managed the contracts as if he were the sole owner. Amelia had signed papers for years, trusting her husband, without reading them completely, but now she realized that legally she was entitled to a considerable fortune. Preparations for the awards gala began 3 weeks before the event. Ethan had been nominated as one of the most outstanding architects of the year, and of course, he expected Amelia to accompany him. However, his expectations for his wife's appearance were specific and humiliating. "I hope you're not going to wear one of your embarrassing little outfits," he said one morning at breakfast. "You know what these events are like. All the important people will be there, and I can't have you making a bad impression on my account." Amelia decided to design and make her own gown for the occasion. It was an ambitious project, a navy blue evening gown with hand-embroidered details that took weeks to complete. But every stitch was made with a purpose, every detail designed to show that she was much more than Ethan believed. While she sewed late into the night, Amelia planned not only the details of the dress, but also the moves she would make in the coming weeks. Jessica had confirmed that her legal analysis was correct. Amelia was entitled to a substantial part of Ethan's assets, and with the right strategy, she could claim much more than he would ever imagine. The night before the event, Amelia was in her workshop, putting the final touches on the dress. Ethan came down, probably to make some disparaging comment about her work, but he was speechless for a moment when he saw the finished gown. "Not bad," he finally said, though his tone couldn't hide his surprise. "I guess after all this time, you had to learn something." Amelia didn't respond. She hung the dress up carefully and headed for the stairs, but before going up, she stopped and turned to Ethan. "Tomorrow will be a very special night," she said with a smile he couldn't interpret. That night, Amelia lay awake until very late, staring at her bedroom ceiling. Ethan slept soundly beside her, completely oblivious to what was about to happen. Amelia got up silently, went to the bathroom, and looked at herself in the mirror. The woman staring back was no longer the same one who had accepted years of humiliation. There was a determination in her eyes she had never felt before. Tomorrow, she told herself. Tomorrow everything changes. She went back to bed but didn't sleep. She watched Ethan's serene face as he slept. There was something almost poetic in the fact that he was resting peacefully, unaware that this would be the last night of his supposed superiority. Amelia knew that after the awards gala, nothing would ever be the same again. The day of the event dawned with a clear sky and a crisp air that seemed to herald a positive change. Amelia woke up early as usual, but this time there was something different in her movements. Every gesture was more decisive, every step firmer. The time had come to take off the mask of submission she had worn for years. As she prepared for what would be the most important night of her life, Amelia looked at herself one last time in the mirror. The woman staring back was no longer the same one she had been at the beginning of the story. She was someone entirely new, someone who had waited patiently for years for the perfect moment, and that moment had finally arrived. The majestic Plaza Hotel glowed with an elegance that only money can buy. Golden lights reflected off the polished marble lobby where the elite of New York's real estate sector gathered for the most important event of the year. Amelia stepped out of the car with a grace that surprised even herself. The navy blue dress she had made fit her body perfectly, and the gold embroidery caught the light from the chandeliers in a magical way. Ethan, impeccable in his tuxedo, walked beside her with the confidence of someone who knows all eyes are on him. But this time, the glances were also directed at his wife, though he didn't seem to notice. Amelia had achieved something she hadn't managed in years. She stood out without any apparent effort, radiating a natural elegance that was impossible to ignore. The hotel lobby was filled with industry personalities. Architects, engineers, investors, and their partners chatted animatedly with glasses of champagne in hand. Amelia recognized several from the photos in trade magazines, but for the first time in years, she didn't feel out of place among them. "Ethan, my friend," a deep voice boomed from across the lobby. The president of the Developers Association, Mr. Davenport, was approaching with open arms. Amelia knew this man was one of the most important figures at the event and that his recognition could make or break careers. "Mr. Davenport, what a pleasure to see you," Ethan replied with his most charismatic smile. "Let me introduce my wife, Amelia." "Mrs. Hayes, it's an honor to finally meet you," said Mr. Davenport, taking Amelia's hand with genuine courtesy. "You look stunning tonight. That dress is a work of art." Amelia felt a warmth she hadn't experienced in years. "Thank you so much, Mr. Davenport. You're very kind. Where did you find such an exquisite piece? The craftsmanship is absolutely impeccable." Before Amelia could answer, Ethan intervened with a laugh that was meant to be casual but sounded forced to her. "Oh, Amelia has her little hobbies. She likes to play with a needle and thread." The way he pronounced the word hobbies gave Amelia the familiar feeling of humiliation, but this time was different. Instead of shrinking, she stood taller and smiled with a confidence that surprised both men. "Actually, I designed and made this dress myself," she said in a clear, firm voice. "Sewing isn't just a hobby for me. It's a passion I've cultivated for years." Mr. Davenport looked at her with renewed interest. "Astonishing, truly astonishing. By any chance, do you know the designer Olivia Clark, who has done the interior design for our luxury projects? I think you two should meet. You'd have a lot in common." Ethan stood beside her with an increasingly rigid smile as Mr. Davenport continued to praise Amelia's work. He wasn't used to his wife receiving this kind of attention, much less her handling it with such grace. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more guests. Amelia immediately recognized Brooke, who arrived with two colleagues from the firm. She wore a tight black dress that accentuated her athletic figure, and her hair was pulled back in a high ponytail that gave her a sophisticated but cold air. Brooke approached the group with the confidence of someone who knows she is welcome. "Mr. Davenport, Ethan, what a joy to see you here. she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes as her gaze briefly fell on Amelia. "Brooke, you look fantastic tonight," Ethan replied with an enthusiasm that contrasted sharply with the coolness with which he had received the compliments toward his wife. Amelia observed the exchange with the attention she had perfected over months. There was a familiarity in the way Ethan said Brooke's name that went beyond professional, and the way Brooke looked at him with a barely concealed possessiveness confirmed the suspicions Amelia had been cultivating. "Mrs. Hayes." Brooke finally addressed Amelia with a smile that would have seemed friendly to a casual observer. "What an interesting dress. Very domestic." The word domestic was spoken with the same disdain she had used weeks before in their home. Amelia felt the provocation but maintained her composure. "Thank you, Brooke. I designed it especially for this occasion." "What a talent," Brooke murmured, though her tone suggested the exact opposite. The tension between the two women was palpable, but the men didn't seem to notice. Mr. Davenport continued his conversation with Ethan about future projects, while Amelia and Brooke sized each other up like two gladiators assessing their opponent. Over the next hour, this scene repeated itself several times. Amelia was introduced to several prominent figures at the event, and on each occasion she received sincere compliments on her elegance and her dress. Businessmen, architects, and their wives seemed genuinely impressed by her presence and natural grace. Some even expressed interest in her design and sewing skills. However, every time Amelia began to shine in a conversation, Ethan found a way to belittle her achievements or divert the attention to himself. And every time Brooke was present, her subtly disparaging comments created an atmosphere of tension that only Amelia could fully perceive. Dinner was served in the hotel's grand ballroom, decorated with opulent floral arrangements and lit by crystal chandeliers. Amelia was seated at the head table with Ethan and several of the most important couples in the industry, with a good view of the stage. Brooke was strategically placed at a nearby table from where she could maintain eye contact with Ethan. During dinner, Amelia actively participated in the conversation, demonstrating a knowledge of the industry that surprised many. She had been married to an architect for 15 years. Although Ethan had never valued her opinion, she had absorbed a great deal of information about the business. Her intelligent comments and pertinent questions earned her the respect of the other diners. "I didn't know Mrs. Hayes was so well informed about zoning regulations," commented a major New York investor. "Her insight on the impact of the new legislation is very astute." Ethan laughed nervously. "Amelia listens a lot when I work at home. I guess some of it rubbed off on her." It was again his way of belittling her contribution, of making her seem like a passive spectator rather than an active participant. But this time, Amelia didn't let it slide. "Actually, I've been studying the legislation on my own," she said with a serene smile. "I believe it's important to understand the legal context of the projects my husband undertakes." The conversation continued, and Amelia kept participating with a confidence that grew by the minute. She could feel the admiring glances of the other guests, but she also sensed Ethan's growing discomfort and Brooke's barely contained irritation. After dinner, as dessert and coffee were served, Amelia excused herself to go to the restroom. She needed a moment to process everything that had happened during the evening. For the first time in years, she had felt valued and respected, and the experience was exhilarating. The ladies' lounge at the hotel was as luxurious as the rest of the facility, with gold-framed mirrors, polished brass fixtures, and soft lighting that made everyone look their best. As Amelia was touching up her makeup, she heard footsteps behind her. "Well, well," said Brooke's voice, the perfect wife, composing herself for her next act. Amelia turned slowly, not losing the composure she had maintained all night. "Brooke, what a coincidence to find you here." "Coincidence?" Brooke said with a cruel smile. "Nothing I do near Ethan is a coincidence. I think it's time we had a frank talk, Amelia." Amelia closed her purse carefully and turned completely to face her. "I'm listening." Brooke took a step closer, invading Amelia's personal space. "Listen to me carefully, because I'm only going to say this once. Ethan doesn't love you anymore. He hasn't for months. He's with me because I give him what you never can. Passion, intelligence, ambition. You're just an old piece of furniture in his life, something he keeps out of habit." Each word was like a dagger. But Amelia maintained an impassive expression. I know you have feelings for my husband, Brooke, but I'm afraid you're confusing physical attraction with real love. Brooke's laugh echoed in the marble bathroom. Real love? You're pathetic. Look at yourself in the mirror, Amelia. Take a good look. You're a 40-year-old woman who sews dresses for her neighbors? You're boring, predictable, and completely insignificant. Ethan is with me because I represent the future, and you're just a reminder of his past mistakes. Amelia felt a surge of rage, but years of training allowed her to maintain control. If Ethan feels that way, he should have the courage to tell me himself. Oh, honey, he's told me plenty. He's told me how unbearable you've become, how much your mediocrity irritates him, the relief he feels coming home and not having to pretend he finds you attractive. He said if it weren't for the legal complications of a divorce, he would have left you years ago. Now, Brooke's words had found their mark. Amelia felt as if she'd been punched in the stomach, but she barely managed to keep her composure. Brooke, interpreting Amelia's silence as a victory, continued her attack. So here's my offer. For your own good, just disappear. File for divorce, take the miserable share of the fortune you're entitled to, and get out. Otherwise, I will make your life so miserable that you'll have no choice but to leave. Amelia took a deep breath and stood tall. Brooke, you're overestimating your importance in my husband's life, and you're definitely underestimating my ability to fight for my marriage. Brooke's smile became even crueler. Your marriage? Don't make me laugh. Your marriage is a sham, Amelia, a lie you maintain for appearances. But I'm going to end it, and you won't be able to do anything to stop me. At that moment, Brooke made her biggest mistake. Driven by anger and frustration, she raised her hand and slapped Amelia across the cheek. The sound echoed in the silent bathroom, and Amelia's cheek instantly turned red. That, Brooke said with satisfaction, is for daring to challenge me. Next time will be much worse. Amelia touched her cheek carefully, feeling the sting. But instead of tears of pain, there was something far more dangerous in her eyes. A cold, calculating determination. Brooke, she said, her voice not trembling at all, you just made the biggest mistake of your life. Without waiting for a response, Amelia walked out of the bathroom with all her dignity intact, leaving Brooke alone with her momentary victory. But as she walked down the hall toward the main ballroom, Amelia knew she had just received the most valuable gift she could have asked for, the perfect justification for what she was about to do. When she returned to the ballroom, several guests immediately noticed the red mark on her cheek. Amelia, what happened to you? Asked Mr. Davenport's wife with genuine concern. Before Amelia could answer, Brooke returned to the ballroom with a smug smile. Ethan, who was talking with some colleagues, saw the commotion and walked over. What's going on here? He asked, looking back and forth between Amelia and Brooke. Amelia looked her husband directly in the eyes. Brooke and I had a little altercation in the bathroom. She hit me. The silence that followed was deafening. All the nearby guests fell quiet to see how Ethan would react to the accusation that his colleague had assaulted his wife. Ethan looked at Amelia's reddened cheek and then at Brooke, who had an expression of false innocence. For a moment that seemed like an eternity, Amelia thought her husband would finally come to her defense, but then Ethan did something that changed everything forever. He started to laugh. It wasn't a nervous or uncomfortable laugh. It was a genuine belly laugh, as if he found the situation truly hilarious. Oh, Amelia, always so dramatic. You probably bumped into something and now you're blaming Brooke. The words hit Amelia like a physical blow, but what followed was even worse. Looking at the guests who were watching the scene with growing discomfort, Ethan added with a cruel smile, "Maybe this will teach her what her place is." The entire room fell silent. Even the guests who hadn't witnessed the initial exchange realized that something terrible had happened. A woman had accused another of assault, and the husband, instead of comforting or investigating, had chosen to publicly humiliate his own wife. Amelia felt as if the floor had opened up beneath her feet. Not only had she been physically assaulted, but now she was being humiliated in front of the most important people in New York's business sector. Her husband, the man who had promised to love and protect her, had chosen to laugh at her pain. But while everyone expected Amelia to break down, she did something completely unexpected. She took a deep breath, stood up straight, and with a serenity that stunned everyone present, she said, "You're right, Ethan. I really do need to learn what my place is." Without another word, Amelia turned and walked toward the exit of the ballroom. Her steps were firm and determined. She didn't stop to listen to the murmurs of disapproval that some guests directed at Ethan. She walked out of the hotel and went to the car that had brought them. The driver, waiting in the parking area, was surprised to see her alone. "Shall I take you home, Mrs. Hayes?" Amelia sat in the back seat and closed her eyes for a moment. When she opened them, there was a determination in them she had never shown before. "Yes, please. But first, could you give me a few minutes? I need to make an important call." The driver nodded and discreetly withdrew. Amelia took out her cell phone and dialed the number she knew by heart. "Jessica, it's Amelia. I know it's late, but we have to execute the plan. Yes, tonight. By tomorrow morning, everything will be ready." She listened carefully to her lawyer friend's response, making a mental note of every detail of what she would have to do in the coming hours. "Perfect. I'll see you at your office at 6 a.m. Bring all the documents we've prepared. It's going to be a very interesting morning." After hanging up, Amelia asked the driver to take her home. During the ride, she didn't say a single word, but her mind was working at lightning speed, going over every step of the plan she had been preparing for months. When she got home, Amelia didn't turn on the lights. Instead, she went straight to the home office where she had prepared a portfolio of documents that Ethan had never seen. She sat at the desk and, under the light of a small lamp, began to sign the papers with the precision that months of preparation had given her. Every signature was deliberate. Every document had been carefully prepared for this moment. Amelia knew exactly what she was doing, and for the first time in years, she felt she had total control of her destiny. As she signed the last document, a smile formed on her lips. It wasn't the submissive smile she had shown for years, but something entirely different. It was the smile of a woman who had just found her power and was about to use it in a devastating way. Ethan had chosen to laugh publicly at her pain. Brooke had chosen to attack her physically and verbally. Both had gravely underestimated the woman they thought they knew, but they didn't know the real Amelia. And tomorrow morning, when Ethan woke up, he would find out exactly who his wife really was. The night was over, but for Amelia, the real story had just begun. When the alarm showed 5:40 a.m., Amelia opened her eyes. It wasn't the sound that woke her, but the adrenaline that had been coursing through her veins for hours. Beside her, Ethan slept soundly, completely oblivious to the storm about to break in his life. He had come home after 2 a.m., smelling of alcohol and a perfume that wasn't his wife's, muttering excuses Amelia no longer needed to hear. She got up with the silent movements she had perfected over the years, but this time with a completely different purpose. As she went to the bathroom, her mind automatically flashed back 6 months to when everything had started to change. The exact moment was a Tuesday afternoon when she found Ethan in the office reviewing property documents he thought she would never understand. That afternoon, Amelia had entered the office to bring him coffee. As usual, Ethan was focused on his computer with several contracts spread across the desk. As she approached, he quickly closed a folder and looked at her with irritation. "Can't you knock before you come in? I'm dealing with important things you wouldn't understand." Amelia apologized as always and left the coffee cup on the desk, but as she turned to leave, something caught her eye. Among the papers Ethan had tried to hide, she saw her signature on a document she didn't remember signing recently. It was just a glimpse, but it was enough to pique her curiosity. That night, when Ethan went out to one of his supposed work meetings, Amelia returned to the office. It took her almost an hour to find the combination to the safe that Ethan thought was secret, but which she had seen him open dozens of times over the years. Inside was a folder marked Joint Properties, and within it, the information that would completely change her perspective on her marriage. Early in their relationship, when she still trusted Ethan completely, she had signed numerous documents he presented as mere legal formalities or bank requirements. Amelia had never questioned these documents, believing her husband was acting in both their best interests. However, upon examining each paper carefully, she discovered she was the legal co-owner of assets worth tens of millions of dollars. The discovery was a shock. Not only had she been deceived for years about the true value of their assets, but Ethan had been managing these properties as if they were exclusively his, making crucial financial decisions without consulting her. and most painfully, using these assets as collateral for business ventures she knew nothing about. That was when she decided to contact Jessica. Jessica and Amelia had been inseparable at Columbia, both brilliant students with ambitious dreams. While Amelia had chosen the path of early marriage, Jessica had continued her law studies, specializing in corporate and family law. Now she was a partner at one of the most prestigious law firms in Midtown Manhattan. Their first meeting took place in a discreet coffee shop, far from the social circles where Ethan might recognize them. Amelia arrived nervously with copies of all the documents she had found. Jessica, an elegant woman with short hair and a penetrating gaze, listened to the whole story without interrupting. "Amelia, what you're showing me is more serious than you think," Jessica said after reviewing the papers for nearly an hour. "Your husband hasn't just hidden financial information, he's been managing assets that technically and legally don't belong entirely to him. This could constitute a form of financial abuse." Jessica explained that the documents Amelia had signed made her the legal co-owner of 6 commercial properties, 2 plots of land for urban development, and 40% of the shares in the development firm Ethan ran. The total value was a figure that left Amelia speechless. "But there's something more important you need to understand," Jessica continued. "With the right documentation and procedures, you can not only claim your rightful share of these assets, but you could potentially gain majority control of several of them. Ethan has been so careless with his paperwork, so sure of your supposed ignorance, that he's left legal loopholes everywhere." Over the following weeks, Amelia began living a double life. By day, she maintained her role as a submissive wife, enduring Ethan's constant humiliations and watching as his relationship with Brooke became increasingly brazen. But at night, after he went out or fell asleep, she studied every document, every contract, every financial transaction she could find. Jessica provided her with a discreet team of private investigators and forensic accountants who meticulously tracked every financial move Ethan had made over the last 5 years. What they discovered was a complex web of transactions that had made Ethan considerably wealthy, but always using the assets that legally belonged to the couple. The meetings with Jessica became weekly, always in different places and always with the utmost discretion. Together, they developed a plan that was as elegant as it was devastating. They would use the same laws and procedures Ethan had used to hide the information, but this time against him. The plan consisted of several phases. First, Jessica prepared all the necessary documentation to transfer majority ownership of the development firm to Amelia's name. This was possible because the original documents signed years ago granted a power of transfer that Ethan had completely ignored. Second, they identified all the corporate bank accounts linked to the properties over which Amelia had legal rights. With the proper documentation, they could freeze these assets until the legal distribution of property was resolved. Third, and perhaps most importantly, they prepared a civil suit for fraudulent management of marital assets. This would not only recover what legally belonged to Amelia, but could also grant her additional compensation for years of unauthorized management. During this period of preparation, Amelia underwent a profound transformation. Every humiliation from Ethan, every condescending comment, every night he came home late smelling of another woman, became fuel for her determination. It was no longer about saving her marriage or regaining her husband's respect. It was about justice. The public humiliation at the awards gala was the final catalyst, but even that had been anticipated in a way. Jessica had warned Amelia that Ethan was likely to increase the level of humiliation as he felt more secure with Brooke, and they had prepared contingency plans for various scenarios. Now, at 6 a.m., standing in her bathroom, Amelia was ready to execute the final phase of the plan. She had a 7 a.m. appointment at Jessica's office, where she would sign the final documents and activate the bank transfers that would change everything forever. She dressed with care, choosing a navy blue power suit that projected authority and professionalism. She was no longer the submissive woman of years past. Today, she would officially become Amelia Hayes, businesswoman and majority shareholder of one of the most important real estate empires in New York City. As she applied her makeup, her phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. "All set, papers ready, bank team on standby. Today your life changes, my friend." Amelia replied with a simplicity that hid years of planning. "On my way." She went downstairs silently, careful not to wake Ethan. In the kitchen, she made coffee as she had thousands of times before, but this would be the last time as the ignorant and submissive wife Ethan believed her to be. While waiting for the coffee to brew, she double-checked a small travel bag she had discreetly packed over the past week. Inside were personal documents, some jewelry inherited from her mother, and enough clothes for a few days. She wasn't taking much, because where she was going, she wouldn't need the possessions of her old life. Jessica had arranged for Amelia to stay in a corporate apartment the firm kept for important clients in sensitive situations. It was an elegant and discreet place where she could live while the legal aspects of the property transfer were being resolved. At 6:30 a.m., Amelia left the house with only her small bag and her purse. A car sent by Jessica was waiting at the end of the block with a discreet driver who asked no questions. As the car pulled away from what had been her home for 15 years, Amelia never once looked back. The drive to Jessica's law firm took 20 minutes. Through a city that was just beginning to wake up, Amelia used the time to mentally review every step of the plan they were about to execute. There was no room for error. Every detail had been carefully prepared for months. Jessica's firm occupied 3 floors of a modern building in the financial district. Jessica greeted her personally in the lobby, impeccable in a business suit, with an expression that was a mix of professionalism and genuine satisfaction for what they were about to achieve. "Good morning, Madam President," Jessica said with a smile that made Amelia realize the magnitude of what was happening. "Good morning, Counselor. Ready?" "More than ready. I've set everything up in the boardroom. The bank's team is on video conference, and the official documents are waiting for your signature." They rode a silent elevator up to the executive floor. Amelia felt strangely calm, as if all the tension of the past few months had dissipated. The time to act had finally come. The boardroom was impressive, with a mahogany table for 20 people and panoramic windows offering a spectacular view of the city. On the table were several portfolios of documents, each carefully labeled and organized. Jessica began to explain as she poured coffee into fine china cups. "Amelia, what we're going to do today is a series of completely legal property transfers based on the documents your own husband had you sign over the years. Ironically, his own strategy to control the marital assets is what now allows us to transfer that control to you." The first set of documents designated Amelia as the majority shareholder of Hayes Development, the company Ethan had built over the last decade. The second set transferred the most valuable commercial properties in the family portfolio to her name. The third froze all corporate bank accounts until the financial audit they had requested was completed. Each of Amelia's signatures was deliberate and firm. With every document she completed, she felt herself transform from a victim into the protagonist of her own story. Jessica had coordinated everything so that the transfers would be executed simultaneously at 8 a.m. when the banks opened and corporate systems went online. At 8 a.m. sharp, Amelia signed the last document. Immediately, Jessica activated the call with the bank representatives waiting online. "Gentlemen, you may proceed with the transfers. All documentation is in order and duly signed." Over the next 30 minutes, Amelia watched as her life was completely transformed through a series of electronic transactions. The accounts that had been under Ethan's exclusive control were frozen. The shares he thought he owned were transferred. The properties he had managed as his own officially changed ownership. Jessica, who had been monitoring the entire process from her computer, finally turned to Amelia with a triumphant smile. "Done. You are officially the majority shareholder of Hayes Development and have legal control of assets worth approximately $35 million. Amelia felt a mix of euphoria and surrealism. In a single morning, she had gone from being a humiliated wife to one of the most powerful women in New York's real estate sector. "How long will it take for Ethan to find out?" she asked. Jessica checked her watch. "He probably already knows. The banking systems send automatic notifications when a corporate account is frozen. His day is about to start very differently than he planned." As they spoke, Jessica's phone rang. It was one of her contacts at the main bank where Ethan managed the corporate accounts. The conversation was brief, but when she hung up, Jessica had a look of satisfaction. He just tried to access the company's main account to make a transfer. The system denied him access and informed him that he needs to contact the bank's legal department. He also tried to access his corporate email, but access has been blocked by court order. Amelia walked to the panoramic window and looked out at the city spread before her. From this perspective, everything seemed different. She was no longer the invisible wife of a successful architect. She was Amelia Hayes, a businesswoman in her own right, with the power to make decisions that would affect not only her future, but also the futures of hundreds of employees and dozens of real estate projects. Jessica approached and handed her an additional folder. These are the documents for the new board of directors that will take over the company. I've selected a team of top-tier professionals who can help you manage the transition without affecting ongoing projects. There's also a proposal to completely restructure the top management. Amelia examined the documents carefully. Each name, each proposal, each strategy had been carefully considered to ensure not only the company's survival, but its growth under new leadership. "And Brooke?" she finally asked. Jessica smiled with an almost predatory expression. "Brooke has a temporary contract that expires in 2 months. Legally, the new management can decide not to renew it without giving specific reasons. But frankly, when she finds out what's happened, she'll probably resign herself." Over the next 2 hours, Amelia and Jessica went over every aspect of the new situation. They prepared the press release that would announce the change in leadership at the company, the documents that would be sent to employees and clients, and a strategy for handling the inevitable questions from the media. At 11 a.m., Jessica received another call from her contact at the bank. Ethan had shown up at the bank in person with his lawyer, demanding an explanation for the freezing of his accounts. He was informed that all the documentation was in order, and that any inquiries should be directed to the new majority owner of the corporate accounts. "Did they tell him who the new owner is?" Amelia asked. "Not yet. That information will only be provided when he submits a formal written request. It will probably take him until this afternoon to find out it's you." Amelia nodded. That gave her enough time to complete the final preparations. Jessica had scheduled a 3 p.m. meeting with the company's key staff, where Amelia would be officially introduced as the new president. She had also scheduled a professional photo shoot at 4 p.m., where the images that would accompany the press release and social media updates for the company would be taken. Amelia needed a completely new public image, consistent with her new role. At noon, they went to a luxury restaurant where Jessica had reserved a private dining room. It was important for Amelia to eat well and keep her energy up for what would be a long and emotionally draining day. During lunch, Jessica explained the legal aspects of what might happen in the coming days. Ethan would likely try to challenge the transfer, but the documentation was solid, and he himself had created the legal precedents that were now being used against him. "He's also likely to try to contact you directly," Jessica said. "It's best for all communication to go through the firm. It's crucial that you maintain an emotional distance in this situation and don't allow him to manipulate or threaten you." Amelia knew Jessica was right. She knew Ethan well enough to know that his first reaction would be anger, followed by attempts at manipulation. And finally, when he realized the gravity of the situation, there would be desperate attempts at negotiation. After lunch, they returned to the firm, where Amelia spent the afternoon in meetings with the team that would manage her new company. Each person had been carefully selected not only for their professional ability, but for their integrity and their skill in handling such a delicate transition. At 5 p.m., as Amelia was finally resting in her new temporary office at the firm, Jessica came in with an expression that was a mix of amusement and satisfaction. "I just received a very interesting call," she said. "From Ethan. He's finally found out that you're the one in control of everything. Apparently, he shouted so much at the bank that they had to call security. Has he tried to contact us? He's called 17 times in the last hour, sent 12 emails, and according to the building's security guard, he was at our office door for 40 minutes before being informed he couldn't come up without an appointment." Amelia felt a mix of satisfaction and a strange sense of almost pity. After nearly 15 years of humiliation, of being treated as invisible, of enduring infidelity and contempt, it was hard to feel true compassion for the man who was now experiencing a fraction of the confusion and powerlessness she had felt for so long. As the sun began to set, Amelia finally left the law firm and headed to her new temporary home. The apartment Jessica had arranged for her was in one of the city's most exclusive buildings, with panoramic views and all the amenities she would need in the coming weeks. As the car made its way to her new residence, Amelia reflected on everything that had changed in the last 24 hours. Yesterday morning, she was an invisible and humiliated wife in her own life. Today, she was a powerful businesswoman who controlled the real estate empire she had unknowingly helped build. Her personal phone, which she had kept on silent all day, showed 32 missed calls from Ethan. She had also received 6 text messages, each more desperate than the last. The final one, sent 20 minutes ago, simply said, "Amelia, please, we have to talk." Amelia read the message and, without reading the others, deleted them all. They had had 15 years to talk, and in those 15 years, he had chosen to humiliate, belittle, and betray her. The time for talk was over. Upon arriving at her new home, Amelia poured herself a glass of wine and sat in front of the panoramic window that offered a spectacular view of the illuminated city. From there, she could see the lights of several of the buildings that now belonged to her, projects she had unknowingly helped finance and would now manage with full knowledge and control. For the first time in years, Amelia felt completely at peace. The woman who had been publicly humiliated the night before no longer existed. In her place had emerged someone entirely new. A powerful, independent woman determined to build her own future. Tomorrow, her new life would officially begin. But tonight, as the city glittered before her like the kingdom she had just conquered, Amelia Hayes simply smiled and raised her glass in a silent toast to the justice that had finally been served. At 8:30 inches the morning, Ethan was woken up by the sound of his phone. It wasn't his usual alarm, but an insistent call that jolted him from the deep, alcohol-induced sleep he had fallen into. He fumbled for it on the nightstand, expecting, as always, that Amelia would already be up. But the bed was empty. "She's probably already downstairs making breakfast," he thought with irritation as he answered. "Mr. Hayes, this is the director of your corporate bank. We need to speak with you urgently about your company's accounts." Ethan sat up slowly, still groggy from the hangover. "What about the accounts? Is there a problem with the transfers scheduled for today?" "Sir, all corporate accounts related to Hayes Development have been frozen by court order. We cannot process any transactions until the legal situation is resolved." The words hit Ethan like a bucket of cold water. "Court order? What are you talking about? Those are my accounts. It's my company." "Mr. Hayes, you need to come to the bank immediately. There is documentation you need to review. Access permissions for all corporate accounts have also been modified." Ethan hung up and rushed to the bathroom. His mind was racing, trying to understand what had happened. A court order? Who would have requested his accounts be frozen? A dissatisfied client? A problem with the IRS? While taking a quick shower, he yelled toward the bedroom, "Amelia, come up here for a second. I have a problem." The silence that followed was strange. Normally she would respond instantly, but this time there was no reply. He came out of the bathroom wrapped in a towel and went downstairs to look for her. The house was empty. There was no sign of the usual breakfast in the kitchen, no coffee brewing, no fresh orange juice, no newspaper placed in its spot on the table. It was as if Amelia had simply vanished. He ran upstairs to get dressed, calling his wife's phone as he put on a shirt. The call rang several times before going to voicemail. He called again, with the same result. On the third try, it went straight to voicemail, as if she had turned off her phone. An hour later, Ethan was sitting across from his bank director. The glass-walled office made him feel exposed and vulnerable. On the table was a thick folder of documents that the director had been explaining for the last 20 minutes. "I don't understand. These documents show my wife as a co-owner of properties that are mine. There must be a mistake." The director, a middle-aged man with a serious expression, shook his head. "Mr. Hayes, we have reviewed all the documentation 3 times. Your wife has legal rights to these properties based on documents you yourself submitted to the bank over the last 10 years. The contracts are signed by both of you, and the transfer of ownership has been legally processed." Ethan picked up one of the documents and examined it closely. It was true. He recognized his signature, and Amelia's, but he didn't remember signing anything that gave her control of his company's accounts. But this doesn't give her the right to freeze my accounts without my consent. The director cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mr. Hayes, according to the documentation we received this morning, your wife now owns 60% of the shares of Hayes Development. As the majority shareholder, she has the legal authority to make financial decisions for the company. Ethan's world came to a halt. 60%? That's impossible. I founded that company, I built it with my own hands. Sir, you must understand that the bank is obligated to comply with the legal orders we receive. If you wish to challenge this situation, you will need to seek independent legal representation. Ethan left the bank in a state of shock. His first instinct was to go to his company's offices, but when he arrived, he was met with an unexpected scene. At the reception desk were people he didn't recognize, dressed in executive suits, speaking in low voices with his regular employees. Mr. Hayes, his faithful secretary of the last 8 years, approached him. I've received instructions that you no longer have authorized access to the premises. What do you mean I don't have access? This is my company. We received the legal documentation about the change in the ownership structure this morning. The new management has taken over all operations. Ethan looked around at the offices that had been his kingdom for years. The employees looked at him with a mixture of confusion and pity. Some whispered among themselves, clearly in possession of information he didn't have. "Where's Brooke?" he finally asked. "She left an hour ago, sir. She said she had an important meeting." Ethan pulled out his phone and dialed Brooke's number. Just like with Amelia, the call went straight to voicemail. He tried again, same result. For the next few hours, Ethan wandered the city like a lost soul, trying to comprehend what had happened to his life. He visited his personal lawyer, who explained that the documentation appeared legally sound and that he would need time to investigate his possible options. He went to 3 other banks where he kept personal accounts, only to discover that several of them had also been frozen for being linked to the disputed properties. Late in the afternoon, exhausted and desperate, he went to the apartment he had secretly rented for his meetings with Brooke. He had a key and hoped to find her there, hoped she could help him understand what was happening. When he opened the door, he found the apartment empty, completely empty. Not just Brooke, but all of her belongings were gone. The clothes she kept in the closet, her cosmetics in the bathroom, even the photos they had taken together. It was as if she had never been there. His phone rang. It was an unknown number, but he answered, hoping it was Brooke on a different phone. "Ethan?" It was Brooke's voice, but it sounded distant and cold. "Brooke, thank God! Where are you? I need to see you. Something terrible has happened." "Ethan, I have something to tell you. I heard what happened with the company." "You heard? How? Where are you?" There was a long pause before Brooke answered. "At the airport. A rival firm in Chicago offered me a position." "What? What are you talking about? When did you decide that?" Brooke sighed, a barely audible sound. "Ethan, I can't be with someone who doesn't have a professional future. What we had was exciting when you were successful, when you had power. But now what, Brooke? This is temporary. I'll get it all back." "No, Ethan, you're not going to get anything back. And honestly, after seeing how you treated your wife last night, I realized the kind of man you are. If you could humiliate her like that publicly, what guarantee do I have that you wouldn't do the same to me?" Ethan felt as if he'd been punched in the gut. "Brooke, please, I love you. We can get through this together." Brooke's laugh was cold and cruel. "Love? Ethan, what we had wasn't love. It was mutual convenience. I had access to important contacts, and you had the thrill of being with a younger woman. But now that you have nothing to offer me, there's no reason to continue." The call disconnected. Ethan tried to call back, but the phone had been turned off. He was left alone in the empty apartment, surrounded by the silence of a life that had crumbled in less than 24 hours. For the first time in years, Ethan had to face the reality of who he was, without the power, the money, and the company that had defined his identity. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, in one of Chicago's most luxurious hotels, Amelia was preparing for what would be one of the most important moments of her new career. The International Conference for Women Leaders in Real Estate was held every 2 years, and this year, Amelia had been invited as one of the keynote speakers. The invitation had arrived 3 days after she took control of the company. Jessica had been working discreetly with her industry contacts to position Amelia not as the wife who had inherited a company, but as the strategist who had been behind the success of Hayes Development for years. In the hotel suite, Amelia adjusted the champagne-colored suit she had designed especially for the occasion in front of the mirror. It was elegant yet powerful, feminine yet authoritative. Every detail had been conceived to project the image of a woman who naturally belonged in the highest echelons of corporate power. The title of her presentation, Real Estate Investment Strategies in Emerging Markets, had been prepared for weeks. But beyond the data and financial projections, Amelia knew it would be her personal story that would truly captivate the audience. The main auditorium of the convention center was packed with over 500 businesswomen from across the country. When Amelia took the stage, she was greeted with applause that surprised her with its warmth and duration. Clearly, her story had already begun to circulate in business circles. For the next 45 minutes, Amelia not only shared her investment strategies, but also her perspective on female empowerment in a traditionally male-dominated sector. She spoke about the importance of financial literacy, the need for women to take active control of their own assets, and how to turn personal adversity into a professional opportunity. But it was during the question and answer session that the moment that would define her new public image arrived. A journalist from a specialized magazine stood up and asked, "Mrs. Hayes, many in the industry are wondering how you managed to take control of such an established company so quickly and effectively. Could you share the details of that transition?" Amelia smiled with the confidence that had grown exponentially in recent weeks. The transition wasn't quick at all. It was the result of years of careful observation, quiet education, and strategic planning. Although many saw me simply as the wife of a successful businessman, for 15 years I was learning, studying, and preparing for the moment when I could actively contribute to the growth of our projects. Are you saying you always intended to take over leadership of the company? Not exactly, but I would say I always knew I had the skills and vision necessary to contribute in a significant way. When the opportunity to take on a more active role presented itself, I was fully prepared for it. Another journalist raised her hand. "Mrs. Hayes, it's rumored that your rise in the company was preceded by a difficult personal situation. How do you manage the balance between personal challenges and professional responsibilities?" Amelia paused, knowing this was the question she had been waiting for. "I believe all strong women face a moment when they have to decide if they are going to let circumstances define them or if they are going to take control. For me, the personal challenges were not an obstacle, but the catalyst that motivated me to demonstrate my true potential." The audience erupted in applause. Amelia had managed to transform what could have been seen as the story of a contentious divorce into a narrative of empowerment and personal triumph. After the presentation, she was surrounded by dozens of businesswomen who wanted to meet her, exchange contacts, and explore collaboration opportunities. Several international companies expressed interest in partnering with Hayes Development under her new leadership. That night, at the conference's gala dinner, Amelia was recognized as the Emerging Businesswoman of the Year. The award not only brought her prestige, but also international contacts that would completely change the scope of her company. During the following days, while participating in workshops and bilateral meetings, Amelia received project proposals in Canada, Mexico, and England. Her vision of expanding the company beyond national borders was beginning to materialize in a way she had never imagined. It was during a private dinner with some British investors that she received the call she had been waiting for. Jessica contacted her with news about the legal progress back home. "Amelia, Ethan has finally agreed to a meeting to discuss the terms of the separation. His lawyer got in touch this afternoon. It seems he's understood that the situation is irreversible and wants to negotiate a solution that allows him to maintain a minimum of dignity." What kind of proposal are they making? Basically, he's willing to agree to an undisputed divorce in exchange for a financial settlement that will allow him to start over. He also wants confidentiality regarding the details of the asset division. Amelia contemplated the proposal, looking at the Chicago skyline from the restaurant's terrace. What do you think, Jessica? Honestly, I think it's the best solution. You maintain full control of the company without a prolonged lawsuit, and he gets enough money to rebuild his career if he chooses. It's a win-win. Proceed with the negotiation. But I want to make it clear that any agreement must include a non-compete clause that prohibits him from working in the local real estate sector for the next 5 years. Understood? Understood. When do you plan on returning? In a week. I have 3 more meetings here that could result in major contracts for international expansion. After hanging up, Amelia was left alone on the terrace, reflecting on the extraordinary journey she had undertaken in the last few weeks, from public humiliation at the awards gala to becoming one of the most respected voices in the American real estate sector. A week later, Amelia returned home to a completely transformed world. The company was running with an efficiency it had never had under Ethan's management. The employees seemed more motivated, clients expressed greater satisfaction, and the financial indicators showed steady growth. Her new office, located on the executive floor of the corporate building, now had panoramic views of a city she knew from a completely different perspective. From there, she could see several of the projects she was developing, including a luxury residential complex that had become the most sought-after development in the city. 3 months after taking control of the company, Amelia was in her new home, a penthouse she had bought in one of the city's most exclusive buildings. It was a Saturday afternoon, and she was on the terrace tending to her orchid garden, a hobby that had started as a pastime and had become a passion. The intercom interrupted her. It was the doorman, informing her that a journalist was downstairs, hoping to interview her for an article on successful businesswomen. The journalist was a veteran, specializing in corporate profiles for a national business magazine. She was an elegant woman in her 50s, known for asking tough but fair questions. They sat on the terrace surrounded by blooming orchids and with a breathtaking view of the city. The journalist had prepared questions about corporate strategy, expansion plans, and leadership philosophy. But Amelia knew the most interesting question would come at the end. "Mrs. Hayes," the journalist said after an hour of technical conversation, "there's a question many of our readers will want to ask. Your transformation from a homemaker to a leading businesswoman is astonishing. Some critics suggest you had an unfair advantage, or that you took advantage of a complex legal situation. How do you respond to those claims?" Amelia smiled, stroking an orchid that had just bloomed that week. "I think that perspective reflects precisely the kind of prejudice we women face in the business world. The reality is that for 15 years, I was involved in every major decision of the company, just from a position that wasn't officially recognized. When I took formal control, it wasn't because I took advantage of an unfair situation, but because I finally claimed recognition for the contribution I had been making for years. But you'll admit the timing was convenient." Amelia paused, knowing this was her chance to set the official record of her story. There's something people don't understand about that moment. It wasn't a matter of convenient timing, it was a matter of strategic patience. "Could you explain that?" "For years, I observed how the company was managed. I learned about every facet of the business and educated myself on the legal and financial aspects that many husbands assume their wives don't understand. When I decided to act, it wasn't an emotional reaction to a difficult personal situation, but the execution of a plan I had carefully developed." "Are you saying you planned this transition for years?" "I'm saying I prepared for years to be ready when the right moment came. Some might call it planning, others might call it prudence. I call it personal responsibility." The journalist leaned forward, clearly intrigued. "And when did you know that moment had arrived?" Amelia looked out at the city spread before her. Then she looked back at the journalist. "When I realized it was no longer about saving a marriage or a partnership, but about protecting a legacy that I had helped build. At that moment, I knew I had to act." "One last question, Mrs. Hayes. Many women who may be in situations similar to the one you experienced will be reading this interview. What advice would you give them?" Amelia considered her answer carefully. "I would tell them that patience is not passivity, and preparation is power. Sometimes, circumstances force us to act, but if we have used our time wisely, we will be ready when that moment comes." "And how do you know when the right time to act is?" Amelia smiled with an expression that was a mix of wisdom and satisfaction. "That's the wrong question. It's not about waiting for the right moment. It's about calculating the exact moment. After the journalist left, Amelia remained alone on the terrace, contemplating the city she now saw from a completely new perspective. The sun was beginning to set, creating a spectacular play of colors that reflected off the glass buildings she had helped finance and build. Her phone buzzed with a message from Jessica. Divorce papers finalized. Ethan has agreed to all terms. You are officially free. Amelia read the message and, without replying, put her phone away. Freedom hadn't begun with a divorce paper. It had begun the night she decided to stop being invisible in her own life. She stood up and walked over to the orchids, which had bloomed spectacularly in recent months. She had learned that they required patience, precision, and an exact knowledge of when to apply each type of care. It wasn't so different from what her own transformation had required. As she carefully watered each plant, Amelia reflected on the extraordinary journey she had taken. From being the invisible woman in her marriage to becoming one of the most respected businesswomen in the country. From enduring silent humiliations to chairing international conferences on female empowerment. But perhaps most importantly, she had learned the difference between waiting and calculating. For years, she had believed she was waiting for things to get better, for Ethan to change, for her marriage to be fixed. But in reality, she had been calculating, observing, learning, and preparing for the moment when all the pieces would fall into place. When the last rays of sun disappeared behind the city's buildings, Amelia smiled with a sense of complete satisfaction. It wasn't about waiting for the perfect moment. It was about calculating the exact moment to claim the life she had always deserved. In her new world, Amelia Hayes was no longer the woman who endured humiliations in silence. She was the architect of her own destiny, the president of her own company, and the author of a transformation story that inspired women across a continent. And as the